So why do we need to really jump into this? Well, deconstructing it, the devil's in the details. And this is where we begin to uncover lots of opportunities for efficiency savings. Just think about it. How many times have you wished for more hours in the day? Oh boy, as accountants, don't we all? Things keep changing on us, and so we need more time, and therefore we need to utilize this technology in order to make sure that we have more hours and we can spend our time not just doing data entry, but that we are actually spending our time focusing on the more advisory and analytical tasks in front of us so we can influence the future. And that's ultimately what we are going to be responsible for as the accountants and finance managers and directors, is to be influencing the future. I believe that now, instead of the chief financial officer, CFOs are being referred to as chief future officers. And I don't necessarily disagree with that classification or label. But the benefits don't stop at your desk either. There's sort of this ripple effect of optimizing the AP process. Growth by freeing up now capital, managing suppliers more effectively, being able to negotiate more efficiently and gather data way more quickly, and of course, improve cash flow. There's no organization alive that does not want to make sure that they're optimizing the cash flow within their business. So by deconstructing AP, we're really giving ourselves some tools in order to build a more robust, efficient, and profitable operation. And I can't think of any chief future officer who doesn't want that. All right, so now we have a date with the data. All right, so this is moving from chalkboards to smart screens. So I think this is like moving from Flintstones to Jetsons, right? When you think about that, like manual data entry is just, it's pretty old school. I mean, anybody who's doing any type of like manual data entry, it is time to change. It's prone to error, it's time consuming, and to be frank, I mean, nobody wants to do it. I mean, this is one of the big reasons why we've got a lot of people who don't even want to go into accounting anymore, is because they're going to be stuck doing tasks like this, and they don't want to. So what do we got to do? Basics, we've got to scan and digitize. So this is, I remember when we used to call this, moving to a paperless office environment. I mean, now the digitization of this stuff is, it's incredible what can happen in the actual digitization process. When an invoice comes in via email or it gets scanned, I mean, it's so cool in the program. And if you guys haven't, like I said, if you haven't done a demo, it's pretty awesome. It's easier to use than Adobe Acrobat. So you can do a whole batch of invoices and scan them in, and then you can like split them all out with one click of a button, and then kind of move things around if you want to make sure like two pages belong together. But this is sort of like table stakes, bare minimum for where you need to be in your data, your data entry and automation process. You got to have things be stored via paper. I mean, just accessing it is easier. I mean, so many things, right? All right, so the next thing is once you kind of got everything in terms of digital environment, then it's taking the data that's on those invoices and bringing them into a readable character fields, and then being able to apply analytics to it to really look out for fraud prevention. I was just talking to a financial advisor this morning, and one of their clients was an older gentleman, and this is more like a personal story, but one of the really things that drive home with fraud prevention is that they would have never known that this poor old man had been taken advantage of. Somebody followed him home from Home Depot, knocked on his door like a couple days later, and said, hey, I used to work with you 20 years ago. I'd like to, I've done some construction in your house before, like to see how things are holding up. And then proceeded to say, oh, we need to replace your windows now, and have the man generate $9,000 checks like every week. This was like a $270,000 problem. The bank alerted the financial advisor and said, hey, this is a currency transaction reporting issue. Like, it's right under that 10K limit, checks getting cashed every week. So fraud detection is becoming even more important. Like, we need the systems to be structured in a way where we can identify those potential fraudulent transactions. And that's anything from just routine transactions to oddities in a particular line item on an invoice, all the way to, hey, this is a new vendor. Who is this and what are we buying from them? And this is outside of the norm. Like, we don't normally set up a new vendor and pay them for landscaping services. So really, there's just so many different advantages to making sure that we've got stuff automated. So digitized and then automated, and putting this level of analytical procedures over top of it. All right, payment approvals. The other thing that I would really spend some time on here is just like, how much time can we spend or avoid having to spend if we can automate this process? And there's lots of different tools that have been sort of kind of the precursor to how do we do this for AP. A big one was like Expensify, as it sort of kind of got up and running. It kind of clued people into like, hey, there's a faster way to do this. We don't have to, send a PDF and somebody's got to open it up and then route it to accounting, and like, what if somebody's out of the office? How does that work? What if it's over their limit? It's all a manual process. The auditor doesn't like it at the end of the year. We get written up. It just turns into a giant mess, and literally a bunch of problems for the accountants to have to solve again. The great thing about payment approvals, so the way it works in Quadient is that we can have multi-tiered approval processes, right? So there is a way of saying, based on vendor, based on department, based on role, we're going to do dollar amount, we're doing new vendor, old vendor. There's multiple different ways to set up these checks and balances, so that from a fraud prevention standpoint, making sure those internal controls are super strong, making sure that's really going. And the other thing is just cost control, right? So a lot of times things are making their way through an approval process, and it makes its way up the chain until somebody says, hey, wait. This is going to cause a budget issue for me. We're going to be over budget if this is how we spend money. So creating these approval processes really does create this accountability. One of the other things is that we haven't even really touched on is that when we've got this living in a program as opposed to in a personal, like, I'm going to walk over and it's going to be very a physical methodology. Now this whole notion of virtual teams, remote work, whether that's hybrid, like, we don't have to chase anybody down. You can just go into their queue and then they can get a reminder. So the roadblock to getting things handled goes away. I can't tell you the number of times it's like, well, I don't know, that person's not in the office. When are they coming back? Oh, I don't know. Another thing to be thinking about too when it comes to about payment approvals is really cybercrime, right? So we're really talking about also like, making sure, emails can get hacked. You can receive an email. We probably all have. Can you please wire this money to this person to pay this bill? And it looks like it's coming from that person's email. They've got the company logo in there. Email signature looks good. The invoice number is good. The hackers are getting better and better. So this also keeps this out of our email and into a process where it's protected from potential, cybercrime activity. All right, the advanced components of this is really that education and automation, like knowing the latest types of AP fraud, right? There's phishing schemes, so many of them, right? And then using the reconciliation process that's built into the program. So really look for the algorithms and the AI that can be detecting the types of changes around new payment approvals, new users in the payment approval process. Hey, it looks like all of your payments got approved, but that's not normal for you. Things that are outside of the norm in terms of like either dollar amounts or paying things early. So there's a lot of things that can go into how do we detect and prevent potential fraud. And I think that's a really important part of what our job is as accountants, is to prevent the loss of money. Like, we've got to make sure to prevent that. So, getting back to basics here on internal controls is important, and the letting cash go, that's a big piece of it. Expenses versus supplier payment. So I alluded to this before when we were talking about, hey, maybe this is not the inventory basis stuff, but it is, either expense reports or G&A expenses. This is more referring to maybe the more expense policy things. The great thing is it's the same tool that you're going to be using for all the inventory-based items. So anytime you need that three-way matching, for all of the invoices related to suppliers, and then also anybody who's either using a corporate credit card or who needs a cash reimbursement. It's all going through the same system. So you've got a corporate Amex card and you need somebody to submit all the receipts. It all happens through the Quadient program. Getting the nature of the expenses recorded, understanding the frequency and the volume of spending. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Sometimes people don't necessarily want to follow those expense policies. Maintaining the documentation. Hello, we don't want the auditors to be, kind of down, breathing down our neck about that. And also making sure from a tax perspective, we got to have all the proper documentation there. Are these ordinary and necessary expenses in the course of business? Are we conforming to all the receipt standards? Kind of all the things, right? Is that expense policy clear, but are we actually conforming to it? And that's really where we started implementing a process, a tool that takes the policy and turns it into a process, right? So that way everything becomes automated. And if you've never used one of those, a tool like this before, where you can, say, hey, scan the receipt. I have this transaction on this day. And instead of having to select a GL account, right, you're saying it's a meal. And in the back end, it knows meals coded to this GL account. And even down to like the department, there's additional ways that you can make sure that people have to categorize things. So we're doing the data entry on the front end, and we're putting that on the onus on the person who's initiating the transaction versus it being something that we've got to reconcile later. So major value there. All right. No doubt the end-to-end, the AP, your value goes way beyond this particular workflow, right? You've got a million other things to do that are way higher value. So managing those supplier relationships, negotiating contracts with them, really amping up your diplomacy skills, your negotiating skills, you're building this bridge between commerce and accounting. You guys are so talented. Managing the cash flow of the organization. There's lots of other things to do in accounts payable outside of all the other things that we talked about. All right, so we've covered a lot of materials, that's for sure. Top tips here: standardize workflows, tighten your internal controls, prioritize real-time visibility, optimize approvals, focus on compliance. That is really our focus for automation. So how do we create this playbook? Everyone's on the same page. How do we tighten up this quality assurance around our processes? How do we keep our eye on things? How do we clarify protocols, really streamlining the processes to save time, money, effort, minimize stress? We all need that in our lives. And then focus on compliance, right? So those are our top tips. And then how do we really kind of apply this to your learning, right? So gap analysis, give it a test run. I've been talking to the Quadient folks for quite some time, and one of the things that Nico said, he's the business development manager, he said, we'll extend the life of your dying ERP. And I thought that was great. And the thing is that you'll never know until you try it. Like, hey, by automating this one function and using a tool, does it help us to save money other ways by extending the life of our ERP, or by making the most of cost savings in other areas, or identifying places where we could negotiate further, more data? There's a lot of different things that can come out of that. Also, measuring and iterating. Just go through that process, test it, try to implement metrics with the systems that you have now. Continue to review and adjust, get evidence based on what you're doing right now, tweak it, do some training, education, keep attending things like this, grow your knowledge, and certainly just keep expanding your horizons. All right, so workflow automation, it's not just a tool. This is true. It is a strategy for the future. You just, it's coming, guys, right? So you don't want to be left behind. You definitely want to be making strides right now to boost efficiency, get rid of these errors, amp up security, free up your time. I think there's going to be a lot of other things that we're going to have to focus on outside of AP, and it's coming.